Thank you, my friend, for spending time with me here in St. Paul. We've got 400 people that are thinking of you, praying for you, and very happy that you've recorded this with us for the conference. So we'd love to spend a little time talking about the blueprint for safety first that you have just come out with, which is obviously going to change the world for a lot of communities in the months and years to come. And it's going to mean a lot for family justice centers in the future to figure out how to apply the blueprint in co-located service models. But I'd love to just start by having you tell us about the blueprint, where it came from, what it's about, what you think it means, why it's important.
Well, let me start by saying hi, everybody. I wish I was there in person. And doing this video means that Casey gets to edit out some of my comments, and I have not signed over that I want editorial privilege here. So, so just remember, it's his edit job that we're working with here. But it is. I wish I was there in person, and I wish I could be with you. So you know, you've heard about the safety audits that we do, and so we did this one in St. Paul where we looked from 911 to just to the point of charging, and we had a group of people, about 20 of us, from the system and a few advocates, and we listened to 200 911 tapes, went over and watched people do their job, interviewed a lot of 911 operators and supervisors. Then we just took every single step of the case up to the point of charging. And we sat down with all the agency heads after about 6 months of doing this, and we said, here's all the things that we saw that needed to change. And John Harrington is the police chief here in St. Paul, and he said, okay, so the next step would be do from charging to this, and then from this to this, and this will take us years to get through this. Couldn't you just kind of give us something that maps it out from point one to the end of the intervention, what everybody should be doing? And we thought that from this thing that we had done, yeah, we're totally prepared to do that. We have the whole Duluth history. We've got what people in Minneapolis have done, St. Paul have done, what people around the country have done, San Diego, Nashville. All, you know, we really know what the kind of things need to happen. And so we just thought, let's put together something that brings together kind of the policies and procedures that we could get the agency heads to agree to, that would best position us to protect the victim long term and to hold the offender accountable and then offer opportunities to change. So this is the blueprint. And I just want to make a point that we came up with this title before Obama came up with his blueprint, okay? So I don't know if he heard about it and copied us or what.
Probably.
But yeah, I'm sure. The guy, he copies stuff, you know. So anyway, we called it the blueprint for safety. And what we wanted it to be was just that, like a way forward, taking this 30 years of experience and putting it into policy, procedure, and then a whole series of training memos. So the book you have is the policy and procedure, and then there's online, every single thing in there is explained why you do it and how you do it, and more of a training kind of piece for it.
So before we talk about kind of some of the fundamental principles in it, help me figure out how you make it a reality. I mean, we saw this in policies and procedures and coordinated community response. It's great to have policies, and you go do some trainings, and then 2 years later everybody's gone, and 2 years after that everybody's gone. And
right.
How does the blueprint become a living document, real life in a community?
Well, you know, I learned this whole thing about getting everything in writing and in documentation when I worked in the Marine Corps project, which is kind of where I met up with you. And in the Marine Corps, you know, people shift every 3 years, you know, and a lot of people are in a position for 18 months and then on they go. So in the Marine Corps, everything is standardized. And here's your standard operating procedures. And so when we worked in this Marine Corps project and they wanted a CCR on every Marine Corps base, they said we need it built into exactly how people do things. So we got up with the MPs and everybody in the system and said we've got to integrate this into your policies, your procedures. When they do procedures, they do procedures. I mean, you pick up your pen, you write this, you put your pen, everything is written out. And at first I thought, this is nutty how detailed it all is. But by the time we got done building into a Marine Corps base all the steps that you have to take to process a case, later on the Commandant changed and wasn't really very supportive anymore of that CCR approach. he moved on, and another commandant came, and another one came, and the whole CCR emphasis got dropped by the top people in the Marine Corps. But 5 or 6 years later, when DOD came back and said, we've got to do something about domestic violence, they went and looked at the Marine Corps. It was all still there, because it was so deeply embedded in procedure and practice and policy. Even when the very head wasn't pushing it anymore, the procedures were still in place, so it wasn't very much to resurrect it. And so I just, I think you can't count on personalities, you can't count on charismatic figures. You get people like, if I might say, you and me, who have a bit of, the tongue, right? And we can talk and we can cajole people into things, and then everybody gets on the bandwagon, then we disappear. And that, if it isn't embedded into the daily work routines of people, by policy, by procedure, it's going to fade away. And you always do need leadership, but basically you need to really embed this stuff in very, very concrete ways of how people do their work.
So as you and Jeff and the whole team developed the blueprint, you picked kind of 6 core foundational principles that you felt should be central to every kind of piece of the blueprint. Why did you pick those in particular?
Well, the first one we picked was this basic thing of, it's the same thing of the family justice centers. When you co-locate, you get people together. You can't have a go-alone attitude. We're the police department, we've got a great domestic violence program. We're the CPS, we've got a great, no matter who it is, you have to see that you are linked in very, very intricate ways to other agencies, to other people in other agencies, and everyone. You've got to get the agencies to see themselves as operating as a unit rather than operating as a whole bunch of separate units. And so that was the very first thing, is that the notion of interagency work is not simply that we co-locate and all sit in the same place, but that we co-locate, and then in that co-located place, the co-location is a method to get someplace where other people can't get if they're not really every day talking to each other, seeing each other, communicating with each other. But co-location needs to also then say, and we're no longer separate agencies, we're a collective, and we've got collective goals. I used to think, when I worked in Duluth, if a woman got killed, or there was a really serious, a kid got killed, or some really bad thing happened, I'd read about it in the paper in the morning. And the first thing I'd do is I'd go to work and I'd say, did that guy get sent to us? We're the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project. We're supposed to deal with the abusers. Did he get sent to us? Did we see him? If he didn't do what he was supposed to do, did we report it? Did we do what we were supposed to do? And I would look in his file, and then if we did, I'd go, okay, we
so
did.
You felt better then when
it
wasn't your
It wasn't
case.
us, yeah. It must have been someone else that, if somebody messed up, who was it? And now I can kind of talk to the press and say, it must have been the police, or whatever I'm going to say. But it was this idea that that's what we're responsible for. She's dead, or this kid is dead, or he's dead. My reaction should have been, we didn't keep him safe, but it wasn't. It was, we did what we were supposed to do. And we got to get rid of that kind of thinking. And we have to have a collective goal, as well as everyone has their individual responsibility. But if we say, my job is, I'm a police officer, I go out, I investigate the crime scene, determine if there's probable cause, what happens to that case after that is not up to me. If that's our attitude, then we're going to see failure after failure after failure. We have to see, I'm a part of a bigger picture. And the way I do my job positions everyone else to do their job. Whoever touches the case, they put like a fingerprint on it. And you can watch that go through. And if this person did their job in a way that helps this person and understands what this person needs. So a 911 dispatcher that understands what a prosecutor needs does a better job. And so you can't just get together and be friends with each other. You have to get together and say, if I'm going to do my job right, I need you to do this. And if I'm going to be successful, I have to have this. And then the next person has to say, what do you need from me? And that's what has to happen. And then all that has to be integrated into one set, a collective policy, rather than a series of independent policies.
So the integrated approach thing, I mean, true in a CCR, true in a family justice center. The collective goal piece seems more complicated to me. I mean, do you have to negotiate them? How do you agree upon them? Does every community have to come up with their own collective set of goals? Will they vary by community, or do you think that the collective goals pretty much should be the same in every community in the country?
Well, I guess I think that the collective goal should be that people should live free of coercion, of violence, of fear, that's the overarching goal. It's not just that this case gets prosecuted or that he gets put in jail or something like that. It's that this person who's been living in the state of fear, been living with a lot of coercion, that this person is living free of that. And to me, it's we use the word safety, but I want a bigger thing, which is that I get up in the morning and I'm not scared. I have a friend who it was the first woman I ever advocated for, and her husband tried to kill her, and he died 4 or 5 years ago. And I called her up the day that he died, and this is like 20 years ago I advocated for her. And I said, "How are you doing?" She said, and I said, "And how are the kids doing?" She said, "The kids are having a hard time." And she said, "I had the best sleep that I've had in 25 years. And even after all that time, she still lived on some level, knowing that he was walking the earth and that he still hated her and he still was claiming that someday he would get her. She never slept well. And that night she slept well. Well, my goal is that women go to bed at night and they sleep well. They're not afraid that someone's going to break through, rape them, beat them, hurt their kids. And that's more than prosecuting a case, or it's more than any of these kind of individual things we do on a case. Well, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the battered women's movement not acknowledging that women use violence, that sometimes this violence is mutual, that it's not always about power and control. And some of that criticism is very legitimate. Some of it is bogus, smoke out of different...
we can bleep this part.
Yes, right. So it's a lot of smoke screen stuff, and some of it is very bogus, but a lot of it is, it's real, that domestic violence is anytime someone in an intimate relationship uses force or intimidation against another. Well, that's a pretty broad set of things, and the battered women's movement as a social movement meant to address a certain kind of domestic violence. It meant to address that top-down violence of somebody that's controlling another person, somebody that is dominating through the use of fear, violence, etc. There's been a lot of criticism of the battered women's movement over the years that we're not acknowledging that not all domestic violence is the same thing. And so we painted a picture that domestic violence was about one person dominating another, using all these tactics of control. And there's other forms of domestic violence. For one thing, the dominated person, oftentimes, most people don't just curl up and get hit. They fight back, they kick back, so there's a lot of violence coming back at the dominator. Mm-hmm. There's also violence that isn't about domination. It's violence that's attached more to a mental illness problem. Someone who's schizophrenic and becomes paranoid and starts to think that their wife is trying to poison them and uses violence against her might look like a case of, oh my God, this is domestic violence, he's dominating her. That's not what it is. So the criticism has been the lack of differentiation amongst these different kinds of violence. Some of it's really quite legitimate. Some of it is a lot of smoke screens going up because people want to say, you know, this is not a gender issue, this is really mutual. That's just not true. There's a historic 6,000 years of this kind of violence of domination that we've got to get a hold of in this society, and it's destroying kids' lives, women's lives, etc. But there is this other kind of domestic violence, and so when you use the term domestic violence and write a policy, you can't say when there's domestic violence you do this. You have to say, is this person dominating this person? Is this person fighting back? Very few victims just curl up and get hit. They kick back, spit back, and sometimes they wait until, you know, he's a little under the weather, and then they get him back. So there's a lot of resistance. Nobody just gets dominated without in some way resisting. And a significant number of women resist with, in different ways, but violence is one of them. And so you have to treat resistance violence very different than dominating violence, because if you don't, you actually increase this person's power. If you say to her, we're going to arrest you, we're going to prosecute you, we're going to put you in a batterers group, we're going to do all this, he's going, yes, thank you, and you've just actually made the situation worse. So you got to figure out, how do you intervene in this person's violence without emboldening and empowering the dominator? Well, the idea that I'm not a social worker, I'm a police officer, I'm not here to do social engineering, I'm a prosecutor. We have to see ourselves as that we're part of a mammoth social institution that has huge impacts on people's lives. And that whether we like it or not, we're not just there to process a particular case. We're there to influence how citizens are able to or not able to function in our society. And so we have both we create a general deterrence to this by how we deal with it, but also we create a specific deterrence by how we deal with this offender and this victim. And we can't sacrifice one for the other. You know, we have to see ourselves as operating on this general level and this specific level at the same time. And it is, to me, it is the purpose of our criminal justice system is not to capture a person and prosecute them. It's to create a norm in our society of what behavior is and isn't going to be tolerated, and what behavior is going to be sanctioned and not be sanctioned. And we basically, you know, that was the whole drive of using the criminal justice system to say, we need to start saying, this is a crime, this is wrong, we have to do something different. And for all the criticism of it, there's plenty of evidence that shows we've made an impact. We've reduced homicides, we've reduced serious assaults, we've reduced wife beating in this country over these 30 years. Not to the extent that we haven't changed the culture that really feeds into the whole thing of abuse of women in families or of vulnerable people in families, but we have done a huge thing of make people think, you know what, I don't just get to do this. There's going to be a consequence. And it's not, I don't want to say there should be more consequence. It's not necessarily consistent enough, clear enough. The consequences aren't sure and swift the way they should be, but we've made enough of an indent into that system to say this approach will work if people do it right. This is what I think about the notion of co-location with integration of new kinds of ways of approaching their cases. I have cancer right now, right? And I went to my oncologist and I said, you know, you like to do the poison stuff and the surgery stuff and the radiation stuff, and then you say, get exercise and eat well. But, you know, if I want to fight cancer in my body, I have to have a strong immune system. I have to really be eating totally differently. I have to be moving my body differently. I have to have, there's a whole bunch of stuff that my body can fight this cancer along with the poison you're putting in it. And if I want to kind of be operating in all 6 cylinders, you should be addressing all 6 cylinders, and all you're doing is addressing this poison part over here. So I say to him, I'm going off to the Cancer Center of America in Chicago. I've got to travel 400 miles to find a place that puts that all together, that puts together and I'm not advertising Cancer Center of America here, but I'm saying that they've tried to do what you're doing, is they put the medical stuff in with the nutrition stuff, in with the mental health stuff. I mean, you know, people find out, look, you've got kids, you're dying, you've got to deal with the fact that your life is very limited now and you're going to spend most of it sick. And it means that you need mental health help. You know, you can't just deal with this by yourself. So they put all this together, and people are streaming in there from all over the country. You know, when I went there were people coming from New York, from Alaska, from here and there. And I go back to my oncologist and I say, if they put one of these in St. Paul, all your customers would leave my age, because we want all of this. We don't want to just have this part. We want the whole thing. And that's what you're doing. You're saying you walk in here and you get all of this. You don't just get, here's a criminal justice thing, here's CPS, here's this. You get the whole deal. But the key to it is to make that work for victims is really hard, because those systems are set up to work and to beam a woman out of her everyday world into their world and process her in the way that they process her. And getting those systems to process her based on what's really going on in her life and her family is a major paradigm shift for those systems. So family justice centers could be an incubator for how it is that these institutions can rethink their whole approach to these cases to be more centered on what actually goes on in people's lives. So for child protection to be stepping in and taking kids away from women because you're not protecting them from the kids, it's fraught with all sorts of injustices, trauma to children. It doesn't really stop the violence. It puts kids off in what kind of care. I mean, it's just got a ton of problems to it. In a family justice center, if you're all kind of challenging each other together to what's the paradigm shift we have to make if we really want to be victim focused, then we need to start with what did our intervention do in that family's life? And that's what you've got, that you can't do agency by agency. You've got to do with people together thinking about it and challenging each other and seeing that it's not any one agency. It's the whole way the state comes in people's lives and processes you as a particular kind of case, rather than people coming together, dealing with all the stuff that's going on in that family, and then marshaling your forces together to protect that family from more violence. Well, let me say one thing that I think is a factor. If you work in a system, like let's say I'm a therapist or I'm a child protection worker and I work in some kind of a human service system, I have a menu of 4 or 5 things I can offer people. I can't go down and talk to this woman about what do you need. I have to say, what do you need of what I have to offer? So what I tend to do is, if I'm an advocate and I do protection orders, I look at her as a potential protection order woman, right? So all of these people, a framework that they're using in every conversation with her is really determined by what they have to offer. So she's kind of made into a potential recipient of these services. When you look at child protection, you get a woman with 7 kids. The kids aren't all going to school. She's not getting them off here. She's not doing that. What does she need? She needs a wife. That's what child protection should give her, a car with somebody in it that's going to help her. But what she gets is stress therapy, time management therapy. She gets all sorts of therapy because that's what they have to offer. And then when she still can't manage with the 7 kids while her husband's hitting her or whatever, then she's seen as lacking in something. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to shift the paradigm from here's what we have to offer, fit her into it, to are we offering what the women that are coming to us need. That means you have to start with what do you need, and you have to start with that kind of dialogue. And that's another word that you want to use, dialogue with women, rather than this notion of assessing where I already have concepts up here and I'm going to ask her information, use her as a data point. Have you ever had this? Have you ever had this? Have you ever had that? And then I'm going to put it into some place up here where I've been trained to think this way. What's missing from professional relationships with women is the art of dialogue. Let's talk about your life. Talk to me about your life, and then listen. And then let her drive and define on some level the kinds of things that are going on in her life and therefore she needs. And when it's a mismatch of what I have to give, if I am co-located where I can find that, you see the benefit of that. Because if I'm one agency, I'm only going to fit her into what I have to give. But if I'm literally with other people, then I say, we can give you that. Because we are a we now. We are not an I, you know what I mean? So I can say, yes, we can give you that because we have this. But that means that these services have to be what she needs. I wouldn't just co-locate every service in a community that supposedly helps people out if it doesn't give you then the diversity of what women from different cultural backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, experiencing different kinds of violence need to get into that place of living free of violence. And so just putting every happy-go-lucky kind of program together is not necessarily going to help. It's being strategic. If I can bring 10 or 12 people together, who should I bring together that's going to meet needs of women of really different cultural backgrounds, I think is important, but also women who are experiencing different kinds of threats to them and their children and their safety and their security. So that's one piece of it. But I just think it's really important to, I'll go back to this kind of example. When I go to my doctor, I have a lot of things I want to talk to my doctor about. And like everyone else, this doctor-patient relationship is an intimidating one. When I walk in there, a nurse takes me into a room and she sits at a computer and she says, she asks me about my stool samples. She asks me about how I'm doing, like mentally. Are you safe at home? She does a series of questions. Are you still on this drug and that drug? How often are you vomiting? I mean, it's just like 1 minute we're talking about a drug, then this, and it's everything she needs to put on her file, right? She should sit down with me and say, you've got 15 minutes with your doctor. What do you need? What do you need to talk about? What are your concerns right now? That's a patient-driven relationship. She never asks me, what do you want to get out of this visit? She just gets what the institution needs to now update my file, and now the doctor's going to come in, and he takes over, and he starts talking to me in a certain way. So what does it mean to design every interaction, starting with what do you need and letting you talk and letting you define that? And that's what a family justice center, if they put principles into place, it's got to be, because it's bringing together not only resources, but it should be a victim-driven system then. And you should be watching each other do their intakes and ask the question, if I was that victim, would I feel that I just drove that interaction? Would I feel that we were partners, or would I feel that you were acting on me? You do the same thing that we did when we started the Duluth thing. We kept talking about coordinated community response, and you talk about co-locating people. So we emphasize the coordination, you emphasize the co-location. But I think both of those are a means to something more important, which we took out of our title. Now, Family Justice Center is a title too, but I think that we emphasize the coordination more than we emphasize the coordination of what towards what. Family Justice Centers, if they're not about changing the paradigm of these agencies that come together, then they're just going to make a nicer feel to doing the same things that might not be effective with women or dangerous. So I think that it's the important thing for Family Justice Centers to do is, why are we coming together? What do we need to change? So I'll give you my little example that I like of this one is that if you sit and watch a prosecutor who's a good prosecutor who knows domestic violence charge a case, they will get a whole bunch of police reports and they'll go through them and they'll say, can I win this case? And if they've got half a chance of winning it, a good prosecutor would say, I'm going to charge this. And so they weed out the ones that they can't win. Now, why can't they win them? Usually they can't win them because the police officer wrote a bad report, right? I got 2 witnesses. One is Harry and one is the uncle. Now, I don't know where the uncle lives. I have no idea what the uncle saw, and I don't know whose uncle he is. And here's Harry, who all I know is that Harry was there and then left. And so this police report doesn't give the prosecutor, doesn't interview these 2 people, tell them where to find them. So a prosecutor who knows that they don't have a whole lot of time is going to say, these aren't really witnesses because I don't know what they saw or did and blah, 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 and I don't know how to find them. So those 2 witnesses go missing. Or maybe the police officer didn't even mention that these witnesses were there. The prosecutor, the good prosecutor goes, foom, not foom, da, foom. And over here are laying a bunch of women who are getting beat up who need as much help as this woman in this pile. The prosecutor who throws them over their shoulder is not accountable to those women. He or she is only accountable to his task, and that's the difference that you have to do. That pile has to go here, not over his shoulder or her shoulder, but here in a pile to take to the police department and say, these are inadequate reports. I'm going to hold you accountable. I cannot do my job if you produce these kind of reports. Then the police people who bring these reports over with all the witnesses there, with all the evidence there, and bring it to a prosecutor who says, oh, I don't have a visible sign of the strangulation thing. I'm not going to prosecute this. Arbitrarily just deciding this. That officer here has to be able to say to his supervisor, this is an arbitrary decision by this prosecutor, it's got to be challenged. That's got to be built into not individual relationship, it's got to be understood that every month all those cases are going to come back at that prosecutor that they just arbitrarily kicked out, and that they're going to have to be accountable for why they did that. But you can't do it by individual relationships with people, because they need to cooperate, and so they don't challenge each other. And so you have to have it built into the police. Every time they have what they think is a good case that follows the standards that have been set, and it gets kicked out arbitrarily by a prosecutor, that has a mechanism to come back to these prosecutors' supervisor. These police reports that don't match the thing, it comes back. That kind of accountability in the system is what a family justice center, using the blueprint. This is why I say the blueprint built into a family justice center is the Duluth model on steroids, you know. It's like, it's going to kick it up, way up another notch, because you've got a setting, conditions that are so much, are really, really good to put something like this into place. But I do think that that's my criticism of family justice centers is not some of the ones you've heard. It's that this has to be at the center of your planning. From the day one when people say, we sign up, then are you agreeing to examine every policy and every procedure to make sure that it's focused on victim safety? And if you're agreeing to that, then you're in. But we're not going to just co-locate absent this agreement that we are going to co-think, co-plan, and we're going to collectively produce a book that says this is who we are. And when that woman comes in, she comes into we, not a whole bunch of this kind of stuff. And so I like the title of the Family Justice Centers. And you know, Desmond Tutu always says that justice demands three things: that the truth be told. And when you start talking about the truth, and then you start talking about articulating what's really going on, it breaks through a lot of stuff. We need to get to the truth. And the truth is not these facts that allow for a conviction, but the truth is what actually happened in that house. Who's scared of who? Who's living in fear? What's going on with those kids? How their relationship with their mother's being undermined? All those truths need to come up. And then Desmond Tutu says the next thing is that the harm that's done has to be repaired, to whatever extent humanly possible. We need to be about repairing harm. And sometimes it's too late. People are dead. People are irreparably harmed. But you have to do whatever you can to restore as much as possible. And the third thing is that the conditions that brought forth the violence or the injustice be altered. So it's not just about the individual, but it's about the conditions that created the violence or the injustice. And those are three beautiful, to me, if we can define justice that way, and we can agree collectively that justice is about the truth, what's really going on, it's about repairing the harm, and it's about changing the conditions, then we are on a path together that is much less focused on us as individuals doing a task and much more focused on a big outcome.
As you reflect back on your entire journey in this work, and you kind of reflect on things that you might have done in a different order, or things that you might have done differently, or things that you wish you'd put more emphasis on, or if you had it to do over again, I might spend more time doing this. What are those things?
Well, there's like maybe 3 or 4 of them. One for sure is that I always had this 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 year vision. I didn't think I was going to be doing this for 30 years. If I had known when I started that this was going to be a 30-year project, I think I would have done things that took longer to do. I just thought it took too long to change the schools, or to certain things that I thought needed changing. I thought the criminal justice system can do something now. And so I put all my eggs in that basket, and I think that was a huge mistake. In terms of, I think there's many institutions that hold up, that allow this violence to go unchecked, and that create the conditions for it. The criminal justice system is a reactive institution. It responds to something that's already well entrenched. And so I wish that I had understood the longevity of the struggle, and that I would be in it for this long, and I think I would have taken different approaches. And the second thing is that I started this work in the mid-70s, and it wasn't until almost 1990 that I got so burnt out and so kind of disgusted with your gender, I always think that I could have seen a guy, hanging from a cliff with his little fingers going, help me, and I would just stepped on his fingers, I got just so despondent about the possibilities for you all. And that really that was just I had a depleted soul. And then I ended up going off to, look at a more spiritual approach to my work and trying to come from a different place. And I was very resistant to doing something like that. But when I ended up going to a peace center that had a lot of both Buddhist and Christian kind of origins, but it wasn't teaching a particular religious thing, but a much more what compassion is and what love is and some of those kind of things. And it changed. It gave me a different kind of energy. It changed me a lot. And when I actually practiced both, in what I used as meditation, what other people would use as prayer, when I actually tried to do that, to understand that within all of us is this potential for love, and that I could be in a men's group and I could stop seeing all the crap around him and instead seeing this potential for love. Not every guy exhibited it or changed because of it, but when I was there with him, I was much more likely to bring that out in him than just a reflection of his crap, So to me, I wish that I had, number one, earlier taken a more spiritual approach to the work, gotten myself in a place to do that. But secondly, I wish that I had maintained it, because I went in and out of it over the years, and I would see the power of it.
Of all the things that you've prioritized, advocated for, done in the last 30 years, what do you think has had the most impact for victims of domestic violence and their children? What do you think has mattered the most as far as safety, their lives, their ability to escape violence? Would you put something at the top of the list?
Well, in terms of just practical, direct work, I think when I did women's groups, I think they were incredibly powerful. And I just went to my very first support group as a member of a support group last week. And I went, wow, I see what I went in there distressed, and it was for people it was for families where you were dealing with cancer. And so it was a lot of parents and husbands and wives and kids, and they had to put all the kids off in this room, and then all the adults sat around and talked. And I'd never been a member of a support group. And I went in there quite distressed and left, hugging all these people and feeling I had found people who understood, who could help us, who had been through it, all this kind of stuff. And I've led a million support groups, and I'd never been in one. And I know now the power of those, why they were so powerful. But I also think that when I did those groups, I just felt like, if they're done well, if they're not like pathologizing women or individualizing it, but they're helping women kind of step back from their life and see all the forces that are happening, and then step back in and say, what can I do and what can we as a group do to help you? I feel like what we've lost in the battered women's movement is the notion of community. Women should be coming out of isolation into community, not into a service that services them, for 30 days or 15 days or 10 days and then sends her back out. She should be coming in and saying, I have found my community and I've found other women. And that's another thing that family justice centers have the potential of offering, like shelters do. It's a long-term relationship with women, and they should be finding other women, and that there should be mechanisms for them to stay in contact and advocate for and with each other. And it's a huge thing to build into your advocacy. And we used to do that a lot more, and now we've gotten more into you need your advocate, and it becomes a more professional relationship. Many advocates refer to women now as their clients. I mean, it's unbelievable how many times an advocate will say, I have a client this and a client that. And that's a very different relationship than I work with a woman who, like me, and who, like these other women, are experiencing a similar thing, and we're working together towards stuff. So I think this notion of community was the strongest thing that I saw. And, I think back to those women that were in those groups that we did in the early 80s, and a lot of them have pretty significant leadership positions now in Duluth in different nonprofits and in different work. They went on to do organizing on different issues, and very few of them went back into violent relationships because they weren't lonely. They had a support system, and it wasn't just coming in, getting a service, and going out. And if anything, if the Family Justice Centers can organize community and keep it community and bond and have women meet each other and work with each other, it's a huge impact.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for your work on behalf of tens of thousands of people that have been touched by your work and thousands of women who have been saved because of your work. Thank you. We love you.
Thank you. You just tried to do a Barbara Walters moment. I'm not participating.
We love you.
Thank you.
And I cherish, among many other things, your sense of humor, even to this very moment. So blessings on you, my friend.
Thank you very much.